Okay. Hey, everybody. Welcome to ACM's research panel on February 22nd, 2023. So before we ask our lovely panelists some questions, I'd like to really quickly go through some ACM-related announcements. Yeah, actually, that works. Great. So first things first, if you have not become a member, please sign up. You get some benefits, free t-shirt at the end of the semester. You're eligible for giveaways. We also invite her to spring banquet, and you also get your resume forwarded to sponsors and so on and so forth. Those are the main points. I'll cut it short. But minimum 9 meetings in the spring semester to be considered a member. I recommend joining a couple. The things I'm going to list today, you'll have a good chance to fill in some of your membership points if you so choose. So it looks like everyone's ready. So I'll go ahead and skip on. So a couple of upcoming events. So first things first, directly right after this meeting, there's going to be a social where you're painting a picture. That's fun, isn't it? Hopefully that was not sarcastic. That'll be from 4 to 5, just outside of Freebirds. So it's kind of, so it'll be in the student union. It's sort of across the current building we are right now. So if you're interested, please feel free to go there. You'll get attendance points. And also, concurrently, 4:30 to 6, there's also a Rowdy Creators General Meeting. If you're interested in projects and learning more about what's going on, please feel free to join. And that'll be at MPB 467 from 4:30 to 6. And lastly, ICPC will have their general meeting, yet another one on Sunday, February 26th. It'll go from 1 to 4 p.m. You don't have to stay the whole time. So just feel free to join whenever. And that'll be not just on MPB 467, but also on Discord. Let's see. Oh, yeah. And so big announcement here. So if you have not registered for Rowdy Hacks, please do so. I highly recommend it. It's a chance to get a project done in 24 hours. There's free food, swag, or the like. Even if, again, you're not staying there the whole time, I highly recommend you just at least go there to see what's up. And plus, there's an event to network with sponsors. So if you want your resume checked out or you want to speak to them about jobs, there's also a great opportunity of that. And if I'm going way too fast about these things, let me know and I can come back towards the end. And finally, for the meeting, if you have not signed in yet, please take a moment to scan the QR code and sign into Portal. Again, if I'm going too fast, we will briefly come back to this at the end. I'll give it a moment so you guys can take a look. Okay, all good? Great. Okay, so first things first, I would like it if our panelists today, right? So like I said, actually, this next slide, the research panel, I just want to double check. Yeah, okay, first things first is I would like it if the panelists from, I guess, the camera's direction, right to left, sure, right to left would introduce themselves and ideally just your position. So if you're an undergrad, grad, or professor in this case, and what kind of research you do, that'd be great. So let's get started.
All right, hey everyone. I don't know if this is working. Working? All right, awesome, thanks.
Been on like 3D hand pose estimation from a single camera. So seeing if you can create a mesh around where somebody's hand would be in 3D space from your camera.
Hello, everyone. I'm Raghav. I'm a graduate student and majoring in computer science. I do research in a sleep lab, modeling spiking neurons, as well as a neuromorphic lab.
Hey, everybody. I'm Devin. I'm a master's in AI student. I currently do research in autonomous control systems as well as human-guided AI.
Okay, so First question, and this is probably the interest of many students. What got you involved? Yeah, well, students. What got you involved and interested in research?
Yeah, so I actually was fortunate enough to get involved early on. So what got me interested was just seeing that research was something that I could work with a professor to work on something in a project in a lab, and I liked the idea of having my own project and kind of seeing it through. And so I actually initially got involved through applying to a program here called Connect. Which is a consortium of different labs across campus working on problems related to like nuclear fuels and nuclear security. And so through that, I spent a summer in the Vision and Artificial Intelligence lab with Dr. Amanda Fernandez. So that's kind of like what got me interested. It was more of like the idea of, hey, there's a structured way for undergraduates to get involved in something and work with professors, because I was learning so much in my classes. I didn't know as much programming before coming here. So the idea of being able to work with somebody who's an expert in this field and kind of take on a project was something that was exciting to me. And that's what originally got me involved.
So in undergrad, I took a course on physiology and medicine, and this was through the math department. So we did a lot of computational biology modeling, and that was the first introduction I got to modeling neurons and protein mechanisms. And that professor happened to be also looking for a research assistant. So after taking that course, I had like enough of an understanding to join the lab, and one thing led to another, and then he even like introduced me to another project with the genetic algorithm, and it just was very interesting because it was way more interesting than some other courses I've taken, and it was very interdisciplinary, and I kept getting to take more courses with that professor and take more grad courses with that professor and just keep like honing those research skills.
So I had a friend who actually did research with the professor ahead of time, and they were in one of my classes and had asked me if I could help them on understanding a certain concept that they were working on at the time, which led to me volunteering and helping with a professor. And then through that, I actually ended up getting into the NSF-RU, which is an undergraduate experience over the summer for different, topics. Mine was specifically in AI. And then that led into me to go actually into a lab, work there, and actually get to experience what's going on in AI, what is AI, and how everything works in that realm. And that led to me actually going and doing my master's.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for the answers. So actually so a particular point there that both Janelle and Devin described as far as being interested. So my next question is for students who are interested, right? So I'm sure, there are many students in the audience or either grads, undergrads, the like, who are interested in research. So what particular advice would you give to these students who are interested in research? Because I know in particular, Janelle, you jumped on because you had an interest in the topic, and then that suddenly changed. And then Raghav, you took a class. But I guess I just wanted to elaborate more, like how exactly did you get involved? And like, as in, what advice would you give to students who want to be involved in research?
Yeah. Do you have any advice you want to give? Yeah, so advice for students. So when I first applied, I knew how to program in Java and I knew how to program in C. And I just showed like a real interest for the topic. If you're interested in research, what I did is I looked through at the time the like faculty page and like the projects people were working on and the publications. And so I would say if you're interested, maybe try to find a professor that's doing something that inspires you, or maybe you want to ask more about. And then I actually met with that professor in like office hours to kind of like introduce myself and ask a little bit more. So I would say the more that you can just start asking questions, the better. And also, if you're interested, this was something that was hard for me and still is hard for me. I like everything to like go really fast, and I like everything to be like, okay, I'm gonna make this step and this step and this step. And I just wanted to dive right into research, but like I didn't even know at the time how to program in Python. So I would say also ask your professors, if they're like, hey, you're a freshman, a sophomore, you haven't taken this like artificial intelligence class or this deep learning class that I would love for, people in my lab to take. Maybe look at what you can start doing outside of class to help kind of bridge that gap. Like I asked Dr. Fernandez, I asked her what I could do, to prepare for the summer. And she said, here's some things that I would like for you to understand in Python, or here's some papers you can read. So I would say for advice is talk to your professors where you're interested in their area and ask them about what they're doing, but also ask them kind of how you can bridge that gap from, where you're at to eventually, working on your own project or things like that, and understand that takes time, even though you might not want it to take that much time.
So adding on to that, another approach you could have is like try to look for flyers or maybe see some bulletin boards, because every now and then I've seen flyers in like completely other departments. Like my first research experience was in the bio department because the professor's background was in mathematics and neuron modeling. And there every now and then I see flyers for like maybe another bio professor who doesn't have coding experience that wants to build a dashboard, or they want to build some other bioinformatics related mathematical tools to extract data. And that's something like exactly what computer science students like might be able to quickly pick up, get their hands on, and go through like an iterative process of like software engineering and like ask the PI, okay, like, is this good? Is this what you want? And then you can go through a process and even build a software project out of that. It's not exactly, I guess, well, it still counts as research because you're building scientific tools to help learn new to help further science, but it could be another angle to like get your foot in the door.
Yeah, like everything that's been said is actually really good. My main point of advice is just reach out to your professors, because typically they're looking for students that are interested in their topics to work with them. So my piece of advice is just reach out to your professors, see what they're doing, and then see if that's something you want to do. Because if you invest a lot of time, they'll actually invest a lot of time into you as well. So.
Right, so kind of jumping on points from all three of you guys. The first thing I'm going to tell any student who wants to do research is you guys should be interested in doing research, right? So that's the first point, what Devin mentioned. Are you really interested in working on a topic, right? Now, there's times, I mean, this is going to happen, right? Every student faces this situation where you really want to work on something. You really want to build up your resume. You want to work on anything, right? Which is good. I mean, you can work on anything that you want, you get your hands on, great. But at some point, you might want to decide whether this is really something that you are interested in, because that's what is going to motivate you to keep working on it, right? Because I've seen students who come excited that, yeah, I want to work on this particular project. And after a certain point, they're like, I don't have any idea what's happening. That's okay. But the major part that happens is they're not motivated enough to pursue that, right? So you should be motivated enough to pursue a certain topic. And that's only going to happen if you're really interested in that topic. Build up on the point what Raghav mentioned is there's like different stages where you can get involved in research. And so there's freshman, you don't have much experience, you have like basic coding experience. Let's say you have Python experience. I mean, I'm talking about my research, right? So let's say you have Python experience, or you don't have any experience from the courses, but you have experience in designing games, right? I work in virtual reality. I'm always looking out for students who can help me design certain, like games or certain experiences, certain environments. Great, you can tag along, right? That's the first step, right? So you're not really doing complete research, but you're involved in a research lab, right? Which is part of a, like that work that you do is going to be part of a bigger project. Then comes, like, oh, you are, like knowledgeable about a certain topic. Like let's say, for example, Janelle is working on a topic on pose estimation. She may have not known, I mean, you can talk about it, but you may have not known everything about pose estimation or a lot about pose estimation to begin with, but you know something about AI or computer vision to start off, right? That's like probably around your, let's say, junior year. Yeah, probably around your junior year is when you would probably want to see that, oh, I've taken a course with this professor who is taking AI or who's doing, I don't know, let's say you want to do cybersecurity. You have taken a course with that professor. That professor has certain projects that you want to work with. Then you can start getting involved in that, right? So reach out to the professors. But at that point, you already have some knowledge about the topic, and then you're diving deeper into the topic, and that's when you're doing research. There's like different stages where you can get involved in research. So don't think that you have to get involved only after you know everything. You can start early as well. I'm going to tell you other side of it as well. So I may get like 100 students reaching out to me. Well, just exaggerating, but let's say, for example, I'm getting like 10 students who reach out to me and who want to work on certain topics or do some research. I don't have that bandwidth to support or to mentor all 10 students, right? So I'm going to say no to some students, which is fair enough, right? So from what my point is, don't feel disheartened by the fact that some professor is saying no. It's just that you have to consider their standpoint, that they don't have the bandwidth, they don't have the time to help or guide or mentor everyone, right? Contrary to that point, so you have to go in and reach out to them early enough, show your show your dedication, show your excitement. That's what is going to get you above the other students. Like 10 students, you may want to be the first 5 or the top 5 who probably the professor would probably select to work on, right? So to work with. So there's a lot of stuff, but I guess I'm going to pause here. Probably you have other questions that may touch upon all of these.
Yeah, actually, you bring up a good point about, I guess, expectations for undergrad students, or I suppose students in general, when you talk about being motivated enough to work on a problem, and then also knowing enough at a certain stage, or you may or may not know certain things at certain stages. So as far as that expectation, how does that differ from undergrads and graduates? Like as far as the research rigor, do you expect graduates to be more independent? Do you, of course, the amount of knowledge varies, but as far as what you expect in the difference between people who may or may not be more versed in research, right, versus people who are only getting started, what exactly do you expect from those types of students?
Try to answer it in a polite way if possible. Regardless of my expectations, I see a variety of skill set and dedication that comes with it, right? So I've had a lot of master's students reach out to me that they wanna be part of my lab. They want to get some funding. They want to work on certain project, but I don't see that dedication. I don't see their interest. They just basically want to work and get some money out of it, which is fine. I mean, I'm not saying that's wrong, but that's one side of things that I see, right? But the other side of the things that I can also see is some students who reach out to me. Like I'm currently working with Janelle and three or four other undergrad students, right? And all of those students, I'm not really funding all of those students. Those students are really interested in working on a project, working on a topic, doing undergraduate research or independent study course, right? So that dedication is what I'm more expecting to see from students. Now, since I've seen this happening, there's a great or like a large number of students, undergrad students, who I feel more comfortable working with than I would say master students. There are good master students. I'm not like whatever. I mean, I know these two guys, so they're good master students, right? But then the ratio that I get in terms of the students reaching out to me for undergraduate students versus how many of them I would really want to work with versus master students reaching out to me versus how many students I'm going to work with, the ratio is really skewed. A lot of, I would say, undergraduate students are really, those who reach out, they're really interested in working. Now, in terms of the expectation for whether they really know how to do research, I'm going to expect nobody who comes in knows how to do research, right? I mean, I didn't know how to do research when I joined a PhD lab, right? So it's just their dedication. That's what I'm mainly interested in, and whether they're going to stick to it. And we should probably have like a PhD student here. So PhD is 5 years. The key thing about PhD is not really how skilled you are, it's how persistent you are that you want to finish your PhD in this 5 years or 4 years or 7 years, whatever. But you are still going to pursue that after a certain period of time. That's what's more important than anything else.
Yeah, great. Actually, I wanted to touch on the PhD thing, but I want to come back to that later because that might matter. And I think you pointed out a great thing. It's motivation. And I think it really doesn't matter how smart you are or supposedly how smart you are. I think it matters how willing are you to pursue a goal, whether that's a literature dive or reviewing your sources or completing a goal or task. I think you've described it pretty well. Absolutely. Raga, please.
I just wanted to add that going off what Dr. Desai said, like no one's really like a natural born like researchers. You're not going to just naturally know how to derive equations. That's going to take like years and years of like practice. And if you ask any PhD student, they'll tell you that like their first day, they knew nothing. They were scared or they were anxious. It takes like years and years to like develop those skills.
So actually, that brings me to a good point. So you mentioned the idea of not being able to do research right away. So my question is when you come across a pretty difficult problem, let's say you don't understand immediately, maybe there's an extremely complicated equation, maybe there's partial derivatives and they scare you, just hypothetically. And I guess this is more a question geared towards all of you. What is your approach towards tackling the understanding of a problem or a concept? Do you, what methods do you take? Do you go through literature? What approach do you exactly take when you're struggling to understand something?
Yeah, so I think for like understanding a topic is going to look different from like if I'm trying to understand how to work out maybe like a bug or how to do something like that. So I'll maybe answer a little bit to both. But as far as understanding a topic, this is something I'm still not great at, but trying to streamline my process for like a literature review. So there are resources out there if you're looking into the field of what I'm into, which is 3D pose estimation. How do you decide what papers to read, and how do you kind of figure out what that means and what that looks like in the community? The way that I've approached it is going on to like Google Scholar and seeing some of the papers that have like the most citations. And when you read papers, something that I've learned is that you don't have to read them and understand the idea fully and be able to say it back to somebody. There are different levels of understanding and different amounts of time that you should spend on each paper. You can do like a pass through the abstract and the introduction and the conclusion, and then maybe you look at a table for experiments and you get an idea about what they were trying to accomplish, and then maybe that's good enough. So you're like, okay, now that I know this, I'm going to go off of this paper, which is more recent, but started with this idea, and kind of go through that like rabbit hole of going through papers that have been accepted to like top conferences on Google Scholar. And if you're not familiar, so in research, a lot in computer science, it's submitting to conferences and some journals of papers. And so you can find out for computer vision what are the top conferences and look at what papers have been accepted to those conferences and kind of get an idea of the standard of what everyone's doing and the ideas people have had. But you don't have to go that in depth on every paper. And there's actually a great resource that Dr. Desai introduced me to, which is like, it's written like a paper, but it tells you how to read research papers. So maybe I'll share that like in the Discord or something after that. But then for like how I go about kind of maybe smaller, like more trivial errors, if like your model isn't working or you're having issues with a piece of hardware or whatever, I've actually started to tend a little bit away from just basic Stack Overflow, but more towards like the developer documentations. Like when you're doing research, there's not necessarily like a roadmap of like XYZ, you have to do this, but more understanding the tools that you're using and how they're intended to use. So I would look at, lately I've been looking at some like NVIDIA like blog posts for GPU issues, or just some different documentation resources for kind of like those quicker problems.
So it's funny Janelle mentioned Stack Overflow, because I was just gonna say, and I'm not trying to scare anyone, but it's not really like a Stack Overflow for research. The Stack Overflow is just literally the paper or the research that the group of researchers have put out. And yeah, she I think already put it really well, that it's gonna be really hard to read the papers, and if you are really stuck, you can just ask all the grad students or anyone in the lab, because they've also been through that, or they might be able to point you to another situation, or they've seen something similar, or they've seen a different algorithm that might be able to help you in that situation.
Yeah, my standpoint is typically the way, like if I run into some challenge or issue with when I'm doing research, I typically first try and find some resources online, just see if I can figure it out online, if there's anything publicly available like Stack Overflow, or like I personally am much of a, like, I guess, visual learner. So I'll watch a bunch of YouTube videos and see if I can figure something out in that way. And then if I can't figure it out or find anything online, then I'll go talk with people in my lab. And then if none of us in my lab can figure it out, then I will typically go talk with my professor and see if they have any advice or anything I should go back and look into. But that's typically how I handle challenges, or if I run into like a obstacle in my research.
Kind of going back to my point that I made previously, Janelle, whatever mentioned, right? So I think everybody mentioned that, right? So each and every one of them mentioned that they're gonna just go online, try to figure it out, try to go through the process, and probably towards the end ask the professor. I'm fine you coming to me and asking, well, for example, I'm fine, like the student coming to me and asking me up front, but trust me, and you may have already seen this, I would be like, I don't know the answer to this. I'm just going to guide you on how to get to the answer. I don't, like, honestly, I would not know the answer to everything, right? Only at, like, for example, whenever I was a PhD student, I would have known the answer because I've gone through that process and found the answer. My advisor didn't know the answer to everything. Same thing. I don't know the answer to everything, whatever my student is working on, right? So it's about the persistence that the students have to find the answer to solve the issue. And maybe there's one small bug in the code or in the research part you're not able to understand, you're stuck on that for a week. Be it, you're going to be stuck on that for a week. You would be still stuck on that. That's the key thing. You just don't have to be giving up and not pursuing it. That's always a key thing that I think any researcher, be it undergrad, PhD student, or whosoever it is, needs to have. So I'm sorry, reiterating that, but that's kind of exactly what these guys also mentioned, what they went through.
Yeah, great. That answers the question. Lovely. Thank you. So before we continue on, I do want to take the opportunity to let the audience ask any questions if they so have any. Yes. So very quickly, let me repeat that for the stream viewers so they can hear. So I believe this person. So they asked, when approaching a problem, how would you reprioritize or prioritize what information to internalize? Is that correct? Yeah. So I guess take it away.
Yeah. So I think it maybe kind of like varies based on if you're looking for like a technical problem, or you're just looking to understand like more about an approach in general. But I would say the places where I go first and prioritize are the like either the developer tools for exactly like what I'm using. Like I'm pretty intense on like what I search, because if you Google search like an error that you get, say your code's not running or whatever, then that gives, different results. So I would go to whatever kind of like platforms you're using, and then you're always going to want to look at the version of the documentation for whatever you're using. And kind of the same goes for researching like broader topics, because there's a lot of papers out there, but there's some that get cited more, and some that are published in more like prestigious like conferences for a reason. So I kind of let that be like my filter and my like gauge on what to consume first, I guess. Is so for the technical side, going straight to whatever framework or language you're using, and then for the more understanding the topic, looking for the top conferences and the papers that have the citations. And it's good to get up to those more recent papers, but you'll find that there's kind of like benchmark papers where a bunch followed after, and that's usually, you can tell by like number of citations.
Or situation. Maybe they're busy. I'll wait a couple of minutes. Otherwise, I just go ask someone in the lab.
Yeah, so for me personally, whenever I like run into an issue when I'm prioritizing, I always just look up online first and see what I find, because sometimes it's a super easy fix and you don't like, you think it's a big issue. But another thing is like when I look up online, what I've sometimes what you'll find is that there's some like obscure, really complex problem that you find out, right? And typically when you run into those situations, you've done something really simple. And that kind of gives me a clue of like, okay, it's not necessarily what the issue is exactly here, but it's something simpler and it's like more of a foundational thing. So I always go online resources. Like if it's something for my research and I need to read a paper, right, I'll look up, because typically there's online resources for explanations, or you can even find the code. So sometimes for me, it's easier to just go through the code to understand. So for me, that's how I personally go. Is I just always go online first, see if I can find something for it. And then if I can't, then I go to like my PhD students or the professor eventually, if I can't figure it out by the like at some point. But typically whenever I'm prioritizing, it's just always online resources first to see what I can do. So I hope that answered your question.
That's great. Yes, in the back. So let me repeat the question for the chat. So this is geared towards Professor Desai specifically, right? And they asked, what's the timeline for joining a lab? Right, yeah. So let's take it away, Dr. Desai.
I don't know how to answer this. So there's no real timeline for joining a lab. It's more like, what is it that you want out of it, right? Like as an undergrad student, what is it that you want out of the research part, right? Are you really interested in using this as a means to going to a graduate school, or getting your hands dirty trying to figure out whether you really want to go to a graduate school or not? So there's like different questions that lead up to what timeline would you basically want to follow, right? Now, my point about timeline was, if you are interested and if you want to get involved, you can get involved in a research lab at different stages, right? As a freshman, or maybe as a sophomore, I would not say freshman. So maybe as a sophomore, you have like some programming experience. You can get involved in some programming part of the research project, whatever they're working on, right? As a junior or senior, you can actually get more intense into the programming, as well as you can probably get into the research side of it as well, right? It's more about what part of the project would you get into depending on the timeline. It's probably not a direct answer to your question, because the question that you're asking is when you should get involved. That's honestly, it's whenever, right? It's what's your intention of getting involved, and when you want to get involved, right? And it's not necessarily needed for you to get involved at the freshman or the sophomore level to be involved in the junior or senior level. You can just directly jump into junior or senior level by the time you have already worked on honing your programming skills, understanding that specific topic, let's say taking the AI course, and you already have that background now, and then you just directly want to jump into research, that's when you can go into it, right? Without that, you probably cannot directly go into research. You can at least go into the programming side of it. So again, it's just what do you want out of it? That's what I would say.
Yeah, thank you. Great. Any other questions from the audience? I have a couple more. So, okay, great. So another thing I actually want to ask. So I want to come back to the thing we briefly mentioned about, you know, internalizing a concept or a difficult concept, kind of in tandem. So as far as all of you as researchers, right, or having experience with research, what are some of the common challenges in approaching research or doing research? And what advice would you give students, either new or experienced research, to approach or overcome these challenges? I know some of them were already mentioned, but if you want to reiterate or suggest something, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah, so I think personally the biggest challenge that I found is that, you know, there's not a set out answer in the back of the book or anything like that for what you're trying to do. And it really makes you kind of push yourself for solutions and try multiple different ways. Like I can think back to some times where I'm like, I don't know if I'm ever going to fix this bug. But the advice that I would give to people in those moments is just keep trying, you know, look at different sources, talk to people. A lot of the times where like I get my like really like good next steps is I'm just, you know, I'm talking to Dr. Desai about what I've tried, and then he from his experience has like, oh well, have you tried this way, or we could approach it this way, or something like that. So talk it out with people, use kind of those people around you and like the resources to see if maybe there's something you're missing, especially when you get so deep into trying to solve one problem. It's kind of harder to come back out and see like the grand scheme of things. So that's definitely a challenge for me, and my advice would be to be persistent. It's hard that there's not that set answer, but you can eventually find it. It'll eventually work its way out. And if it doesn't, then you go on slightly a tangential path. So
I don't have anything new to add, but I'll give like a small anecdote where persistence does pay off, because I stuck on a problem and it was taking weeks and weeks. And I finally talked to my professor and he proposed this like slight change in the equation, and it automatically started working. And that feeling was like, that was an amazing feeling. So I would say keep being persistent, and it'll feel really good when you solve that problem.
I actually had a very similar thing where I was working on a problem in code, and for some reason, some value made it where there was a huge issue. Once I changed it, everything worked perfectly. But for me personally, if I run into like some challenges, because we've pretty much explained what challenges you'll run into, which is like reading papers, or you'll have some challenges with your code or understanding what your code's trying to do. But for me personally, not only is the persistence a big key, but I like to take a break and a breather to walk away from the problem and like completely separate myself from the problem. So that way I get a fresh look at it whenever I come back. That's personally how I go about it, is I take a break, and then, you know, eventually I'll come back maybe an hour or two later. And then sometimes you'll just see, oh yeah, it was a simple mistake and I'm all good now. Other times you'll have to go, you know, back into the grind and the persistence that we were talking about. So.
All right, so kind of adding up to some of these points, taking a step back, but at the same time, this is not really just research. This is about anything that you do, right? You need to have a rough idea about how much time should XYZ problem take, right? Think about, I mean, just course assignments, right? You have an assignment, the average, you know, like the timeline for the assignment, there's supposed to be a deadline for the assignment. Let's say the deadline is 1 week out. So the professor has already decided, or they know that it's probably going to be 1 week for you to work on it. If it takes more time, specifically when you're stuck, okay, it's not really that I'm not talking about like judging anybody's skills, but it's more about sometimes you get stuck on a problem and you get so stuck and you spend like hours and days on that specific problem, but they may not be worth it, right? So you may want to have like a rough estimate of what, like how much time this particular problem should take, right? Now, how would you know that, right? I mean, since you're starting, you don't really know that, right? So again, it depends on the professor, it depends on the other PhD students or other fellow researchers. For me, I always tell my students, just reach out to me, just send me a message and be like, is this a good approach? And I'm gonna be like, yeah, maybe it is, maybe it's not. I'm just probably gonna guide you on what's the good approach for this. And I generally tend to tell some of my students who I know that they get stuck on problems and they just take forever to solve it. I'm like, just don't get stuck. Just ask me 2 days. That's more than enough that you should be working on it, right? That's something that just adding on to that point. Now, one other point that I'm going to mention about challenges in research, especially when you are like diving deep into research part, whenever you're like actually doing research, not really the sophomore level helping part, but when you're working on a research problem, is actually what's the research problem that you want to solve, right? That's one of the biggest challenges that any researcher, be it like a professor, PhD student, or an undergrad, the biggest challenge is to actually find a research problem, right? Because there's lots of stuff that have already been done, right? So where do you find that research problem, or how do you find the research problem is very important, right? And sometimes when you read papers, you may seem like, oh, they're solving a really big thing, but when you really understand, they're like solving like one tiny part of that big machine, right? And that's all it takes for you to solve, or that's all what a research problem is supposed to be, right? It's something new, what people have not done, what you want to work on, and what you want to try to solve. Yeah, so it could be very small problem, but it's a unique thing which nobody has done. Yeah, and that's the main challenge that at least I personally felt, and I still feel, trying to find the research problem is a big challenge for me, and that's the one thing that takes up most of my time, finding what the key research problem in this entire post estimation project is, right? And that's when you can, after you found the problem, that's when you can start diving deep into solving that problem.
So I think you bring a good point about the novelty, or that research is a novelty in some sort of area. So as a follow-up question to that, specifically for, I suppose either any of you can answer this. As far as finding the problem and discovering what is novel, what isn't, what advice do you have for students who are trying to find a novel problem to work on? Where should they start? How should they approach this?
So I spent like all last semester and a month this semester on this question, like trying to find something. Like Dr. Desai like narrowed it down for me a little bit with like, okay, we know like pose estimation, but I had this feeling of like everything's already been done. What am I gonna do? And at first I started kind of pitching ideas combined two approaches that have already been done. Well, that's not really like 100% novel. But it still might be, it might qualify in some cases. So I kind of took more of this like stepped approach of like, okay, let's see what's been done, and then let me kind of write down an idea, and it's probably going to be combining some things that have already been done, and then we'll talk it out and we'll see like, okay, is that like a new idea? And something that was really helpful for me was using, Dr. Desai as, my advisor to push me and poke holes in that idea and be like, well, like, why do you think this is going to work? Which eventually kind of leads to this kind of like, you have to figure out not only what your idea is, but this kind of underlying more like philosophical, like, oh, this idea is going to work because of like these principles, and this is something that is missing. I guess like my advice to that would be, don't try to come up with the like why like aha moments. Like don't feel like has to be your first thought, because it came after for me, and like, well, now you all know it, but like we have to be the only people that know that, like when we present it in the paper, it'll be like, oh yes, this principle is why this like module that I'm adding to this model is 100% novel. It's the greatest thing. but we kind of only know like the struggle of getting there, and that it wasn't like I had a great single idea. So I would say take the pressure off of yourself to come up with this like epiphany, and maybe start looking at other approaches, how you can combine them. A lot of works at the end in their conclusion might say like future works or something like that. So maybe you could go something like tangentially off of that. But I would say take more of like a stepping stone approach, and run your ideas by, you know, your advisor or somebody in the field so that they can, you know, poke holes in it, let you make it better iteratively. It's not something that has to happen all at once.
Okay, so adding on to that, I would just emphasize what Janelle said. You just have to be able to communicate and talk to the PI. They're like specifically trained to be an independent researcher, and they're well known in the field. So if you develop an idea, you can definitely get really good feedback from them.
Yeah, I don't have too much different to say. The main thing for me was like I just think of like an idea. So I read through a very like big paper in the field that I work in, and then I sat there and I thought about what they're doing and everything. None of the math, none of the code, just thinking of the idea, and then thinking of, okay, now that I have this idea and I understand what the idea is trying to do, I don't necessarily know all the math or all the background or all the code, but I understand the idea. How can you change that idea and shift something in it and see how that would impact something later on? And then once you come up with that, you can talk with your professors, and that kind of allows you, without going into the details at that time, you can still come up with a general idea and see if that idea exists already. And then based off of that, you can start working towards the math, and then you reach that epiphany moment, and then you're like, oh, okay. And that's when everything is really nice in research. And then you have to go and actually start implementing it and testing. And so my main thing was starting with an idea, understanding the idea that I'm like the basis of it, and then moving up and trying to see how things will change. If you change just this little part here, what would happen? So. Huh? Oh, okay.
Great. Thank you. So that definitely answers the question. But so before we wrap up here, you guys discussed the challenges of research. You know, what got you involved? What's interesting to you personally? You know, what matters, right? The motivation, and you know, advice like reaching out to a professor if you have any sort of interest in the research. So to kind of extend upon that, my question is for students who are interested, right? What opportunities are there in and outside of UTSA? So inside of UTSA, we probably discussed a little, right? Undergraduate research, graduate research, so master's or PhD students talking to a professor. But I guess I want to get a more holistic scope of what kind of opportunities are there related or tangentially related to research that you can pursue.
Like anyone can go right now?
Sure.
Like,
Sure.
So I guess I'll talk about, I don't really know too much about outside of UTSA, but inside of UTSA, I said I went to the NSFRU, which is an undergraduate experience for, I guess, a research experience for undergraduates. And that actually, it was a group of us all doing different projects, working on stuff, and actually going through. And it's kind of like a mini course, I guess, not really, but you're learning about like AI and the topics, and you're working with a PhD student or a master's student who is your graduate mentor, and then you have your PI, and all of you are working together on a project, and it gives you that experience, and you actually learn a whole lot. So I personally would say do the RU experience just because it was amazing for me. I actually went, so not this past summer, but the summer before I was an undergrad, and then this past summer I was a graduate mentor. So that's what I would do internally, because it was just an amazing experience. It's somewhat like an internship over the summer. So, but outside of UTSA, I'm not too sure.
I know UTSA specifically has collaborations with German universities. I don't know too much about that, but I've seen on their webpage, like they'll have like professors that are interested in collaborating, and you have to go ask like the Global Studies Office to get more details about that. But usually there's like specific scholarships or fellowships for maybe student exchanges. Like there's the German DAAD program as well, DAAD, and it's like really big. They have a whole database on different German universities that are looking for maybe postbac students.
Yeah, I'll kind of add to what you mentioned about National Science Foundation research experience for undergrads. That's like nationwide, worldwide, I don't know, nationwide at least, sort of initiative where all of these different universities, will host different students for the summer. So, you could apply for something here, but you could also apply for something in a different state. You can actually search by like topics, so you can search for like computer and information science and get a list of everyone who's received NSF funding that's going to be hosting this research experience for undergraduates. And a lot of them are still like open for the summer. They kind of have like a later like application deadline. It's usually, well, maybe not a lot of them anymore, because it's usually like February to March can be their deadlines. So I would definitely go online and just Google NSF REU. You also might want to look into, I'm going to work for a place that's a university affiliated like research center, UARC. Yeah, Parker knows. So for instance, there are labs that are university affiliated, but their primary goal is conducting research. And then there's also national laboratories. So you have like Oak Ridge, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, Idaho National Laboratory, where they have a structure that's more kind of this cross between like industry and research. That would be good to look into. So those are kind of 3 opportunities outside of UTSA.
Great. Yeah, I think that definitely answered the question. So I guess to sum it up, there's a lot of opportunities for grads and undergrads. So that's government labs. So like Oak Ridge National Laboratory or Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, or for some of you out there, you may have seen Laboratory of Physical Sciences floating around. I have some experience with that. And then there's obviously universities, right? So you could definitely work in an REU, or as I guess even for grad students, a postdoc. But again, I guess a little out of scope for this talk. But in short, there's plenty of opportunities, which in fact, that kind of moves on to my next question to wrap things up. So, right. All of our panelists here have had some sort of research experience to some extent. So industry, kind of academia related, right? So UTSA or an AFL or UARC, I guess. Yeah, UARC. So how exactly has this influenced your future career paths, right? So we have, like, for example, like Desai here, right? I mean, you're a professor now, or Devin now, right? You're a master's student. So I just want some input on how exactly has research influenced your future goals and current goals.
Yeah, so originally, I have an electrical and computer engineering background. So I was originally wanting to work on circuits. That was what I was trying to focus on, and I thought was really interesting. But because of research, I actually shifted more towards AI, and that's like what I found is what I'm really interested in. And it's got to the point where now I'm doing my master's, and I'm having a lot of fun going through. So I guess doing research made it where I actually found more of what I'm really interested in. So
I guess I'll say 100% of the reason is because I worked with the research lab that I did in undergrad.
Yeah, so for getting involved in like research, I didn't think about grad school. I was like, I'm gonna get my 4-year degree and then I'm gonna go probably develop software for somewhere. But research, I think in more of like a broad sense, has made me realize that like as a career, like I want to solve like really important problems, and it's kind of guided me in that way of trying to find where I can work where I'm solving problems that I think like matter. And it's opened up the opportunity for like grad school to me, and for like a PhD program. Like I knew a lot less about actually what research was and what a master's is and what a PhD is before, or I gained a lot of that information while I was participating in research.
I don't know. I have like 2 different views to this. One, to begin with, I was kind of exactly what Janelle mentioned. Do I really want to sit down and have or write a software or just debug something or just be a standard software engineer for the rest of my life? The answer is no. I didn't really want to do that. I always wanted to do something that was more exciting, that can keep on changing and evolving. Like as time goes, and even I guess like even uh, not to discredit anybody who wants to do the software engineering part, but even that has some like changes. But I guess from like my standpoint, there's some specific topics that I'm interested more in, and I want to work on those topics that were really uh, advanced in a sense, right? Computer vision, AR, VR, whatnot. That's kind of what I wanted to work on, and that's what brought me towards research. And going through that research experience and learning that research experience kind of like put me through that path, and uh, it has opened up a lot of opportunities. I mean, simply put, like doing a PhD program or getting a PhD is going to open up different positions, different job opportunities, being a research engineer, being a research scientist, being a postdoc researcher at some place, and last but not the least, being a professor at a university. So I guess, I mean, it's kind of going the other way around. If you want to be a professor, you need a PhD, you need to be a researcher. Well, okay, there's like different types of professors, right? So if you want to be a research professor, that's kind of what you need to do, right? And I guess my answer to this question, this my personal answer, is probably the opposite. The other way around is I was always motivated towards doing research and motivated towards becoming a professor and interacting with students and whatnot. So that kind of pushed me along that path, and it all obviously opened up the opportunities for me as well.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for talking about your experiences. So we're probably going to wrap things up. Before I guess we transition over to wrapping things up. Firstly, any last questions? We can take one question before we wrap up here, if any. Okay, great. So what I'll ask is, if you have not signed in, please sign in. But with that being said, I'd like to thank all of our panelists today for participating and dedicating an hour. Thanks, guys.
All right, if you guys have any questions at any point, you can reach out to me, send me a message, or well, just reach out to me somehow, send me an email or whatever.